Hello, this is Raziel Cohen with ndftraining.com, and today we're continuing this series of modifying my Glock 48 for concealed carry use. So for those of you following along, we are now continuing through the series of being able to modify the Glock 48. We spoke about the magwell, we spoke about the grip tape that was put on, we spoke about the iron sights as well as the optic, and we also spoke about the flashlight that is on the firearm right now. Now what we're going to be speaking about today is modification of the trigger. Now before we get into the details of modification of a trigger and which trigger might be right for this particular pistol, someone asked a question in regards to legalities of modifying your firearm, specifically the trigger. Things like grip tape and a flashlight might not be so difficult to deal with, but in regards to internal modifications, what does that look like? Now, to preface, I'm not a lawyer and this is not legal advice, but I want to give my 2-cent opinion in regards to modifying your firearm in general. My thought process is that as a firearms owner, we are pretty much always going to be on the opposite side of where we'd want to be legally. So for the majority of people, they might not fully understand firearms, they might not be okay with firearms, and after a defensive shooting, I hope you have a proper attorney and a proper lawyer set up, because that's going to be something that's very valuable in you surviving a case. So it's always very important to think about post-event and what happens after, not just legalities, but the effects of PTSD. There's a lot of really great books you should read in regards to mentally preparing yourself for a gunfight and then post-gunfight and what that's going to look like. Now, in regards to a trigger, my thought process is, in regards to any modification of my firearm, is that if we're dealing with a life and death situation, although it is important to think about post-event and post-effects of what's going to happen, it's also very important to make sure that you survive the event itself. Now, is modifying a trigger necessary? No, you're able to shoot a firearm perfectly well without one. Now, in my particular circumstance, I'm going to be dealing with either a synagogue or being in environments where I might need to take further shots or more precise shots because of the places that I'm in. And modifying a trigger will hopefully be able to make me do that more effectively, because I know I have a cleaner pull, I have a more consistent pull, and it just makes the overall experience of shooting it a little bit better. So although there might be some legalities or things you might need to hurdle through in regards to modifying your firearm, I find that to be okay and something I'm willing to deal with if it means that the effectiveness and my guarantee of surviving a gunfight would be higher up because of that modification. Now, again, this is just my 2-cent opinion. I would hope that you really do the due diligence and look into the proper research in regards to what modifications are worth it for you. Again, my thought process is do whatever it takes to be able to survive a gunfight, and you'll deal with those legalities after. As long as you're alive and the people that you love are alive, that's really what's most important, and you could deal with the rest later. Legalities they might be very difficult, but it's always better to leave alive. And again, that's just my 2-cent opinion. So today we're going to speak about the modification of the trigger that I used and my experience with it so far. So here we are at the tabletop, and the trigger that I ultimately went with is this trigger, which is the Overwatch Precision TAC Trigger. Now, I haven't seen a lot of videos on this. I've seen a few other versions, I believe, of this trigger, but not many videos on the 48. And I think this is an incredible trigger that I'm actually very excited to try. Now, I wanted to get this trigger in particular for 2 reasons. On my current carry pistol, the trigger that I'm running is the Apex trigger. And when I did some research in regards to the one that they made for the Glock 48, they ended up doing a recall because I think it disconnected one of the safeties of the gun, which is obviously very dangerous and not something that I want to try. So although I do really love that company, I first want to try out just a different trigger. That was reason number 1. I want to try out something new. And the second reason is that obviously the trigger that I was going to use, I didn't want it to be something that would end up having some kind of safety issue. So that's ultimately why I went with this trigger. There aren't many triggers available on the market. Some of them are very, very expensive, and some of them just work really nicely. And this is one of those triggers that I was very excited about. So here's a standard Glock trigger. So a part of the reason why I like changing the triggers is not only because of the weight and because of how crisp it feels, but because if you go to a class, for example, or if you shoot a lot of bullets, this inner safety is really sharp. So that might not look like much, but if you have a very consistent trigger pull, every single time you pull the trigger and you know where your finger is supposed to be, it really digs into your finger. This one right over here is soft. It barely does anything when you touch it, so it really doesn't affect anything when you be able to do that. Now, obviously the gun is completely unloaded. Now, let's just do kind of a feel for what that looks like. So this is kind of the take up. So it goes all the way to there and stops. I like having a little bit of movement there. Then this is the wall. We'll do the break. Okay, then we do reset. And we'll pull it back. There you go. It is in my opinion, I'm not a huge trigger snob. I don't have a huge amount of experience with different triggers. I have a moderate amount at best. And for me, this is the trigger that in all the guns I've shot really does break like glass. It is a very, very clean trigger. Now, what's crazy about this is that I actually went to the range to fire like many, many rounds through it and just kind of get an initial feel for it. And when I came out of the range, shout out to the guys at the range there who follow me on YouTube, they said, we want to see the trigger. We want to see what it's all about. They came and they pulled the trigger. And one of the guys there is like, that's a really light trigger. And I said, based on what I've seen, it's a 3.5 pound rated trigger. So he said, can I take it to the back to the gunsmith and let's weigh it out. Let's pull that trigger and see what it weighs in at. So I said, sure. So he took it to the back, they pulled the trigger. The initial pull weighed in at 3.5 pounds, pretty much as advertised. And he said in the reset, when they let it go and when you fire it again, that initial trigger pull came in at 1.5 pounds, which is very, very, very light for a pistol. So that's not something I really expected. It's worked fine. I didn't have any issues with it. It didn't discharge accidentally. Having basic fundamentals and training, I think, is really important. By the way, if you don't know that we do have online classes that you'd be able to take, I'm going to leave a link in the description if you want to check it out. You could go through just basic fundamentals. Everything is online. It's very easy to learn. And that's one of the things we cover is a basic proper trigger press. So that could be something that is really important, especially if you're going to have a trigger that's lighter. And this trigger has worked incredibly, incredibly well. So there's not really much to say about it. I'm going to open it up so you guys can take a closer look at the inside right over here. So move the slide to the side. You can see that it connects very simply. There's no additional bar. So it came with a trigger and the trigger bar, but you didn't need to replace the plunger, which on some guns, they'll have you replace the plunger to be able to have it work a little bit more smooth. This has worked just pretty much with the stock setup very, very nicely. It was very, very simple to install. You pretty much just need some kind of way to be able to drop out the pins. You could have your block right over there. Came back with a hammer. So with a little bit of encouragement, you just tap out that pin. It pops right out into the middle, which is really great. And then there's going to be the rear pin over there. Tap that out as well. That came out much smoother. This whole thing pretty much will just pop out if you pull it correctly. And of course, I forgot that you're supposed to remove this bar as well. There you go. And then the trigger just comes out. So there's the trigger, super simple to install. As you know, it comes out like this. So this is what you get in the kit, just like that. And that's pretty much all you need. This is all made of metal. It is a nice flat face trigger. It does have a little curve that you can see at the end there. So you can really get a feel for consistency of where your finger is going to be. And it's also polished. I'm going to double check what the polish is. I'm going to put it up on the screen. But there is a kind of polish on this that really makes it nicer to be able to use. This is not a really expensive trigger, but it works really, really nicely for what it is. So if you're looking for a trigger for the Glock 48, if you want to modify, first of all, again, have your fundamentals down. So if you're going to get a trigger like this, which breaks lighter than you might expect, that might be something to take into account. But otherwise, this has so far been a really, again, in comparison to all the other triggers I have, a really, really nice trigger to be able to shoot. So putting it back together, again, it looks very, very clean. You're able to choose different colors of the actual safety you're able to use. Yeah, my hands are dirty now because I put it back together. But pull that trigger, nice, very, very clean break, nice reset. My camera cut out during filming, just another day in the studio. So yeah, you're able to choose different trigger things and different like accessories to it. I think if you're looking for a trigger, this is really the way to be able to go. Again, get training, make sure you're doing it properly. You could check out the online training we have available if that's something you're interested in. And if you have any questions, if you want to see something else, there might be one more modification I might end up doing to this pistol. So you could subscribe to follow along with that journey and see what other things might end up being done. If you have any questions, something you'd like to see, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. This is Raziel Cohen with ndftraining.com. Thank you for watching.